Wrong seat? The silver-haired executive smirked, eyeing her penguin sweatshirt with disdain. The first-class cabin erupted in snickers as Catherine quietly turned another page of her book. Little did these Wall Street wolves know, she wasn't lost. She belonged here more than any of them. The woman they mocked owned something they never would. The very airline carrying them through the clouds. Catherine Mitchell adjusted the burgundy leather headrest on her first-class seat aboard Atlantic Skyways, Flight 207 from Chicago to New York. At 40, her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her face, framing features that needed no makeup to reveal their quiet beauty. She wore what she always preferred, comfort over fashion. A cozy gray sweatshirt adorned with a row of penguins, well-worn jeans, and simple flats. A small smile played on her lips as she opened her copy of Pride and Prejudice, a ritual she performed on every flight. The familiar words of Jane Austen soothed her anxiety about flying, a secret she kept even from Robert, her husband of 15 years. Catherine had boarded early, before the usual parade of business travelers. She preferred it that way. No fuss, no special treatment. Flight attendant Melissa had recognized her, of course, with a subtle nod, and "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Mitchell," spoken quietly enough that only Catherine could hear. They had an understanding, built over years of similar flights, that discretion was appreciated. "Privacy, Melissa," Catherine had reminded her with a gentle smile when they first met 5 years ago. "Just treat me like any other passenger." And Melissa, true to her professionalism, always did. The rest of the first-class cabin began to fill. Men in tailored suits, women in designer attire, the usual crowd of executives, lawyers, and Wall Street types who traveled the Chicago-New York corridor like it was a daily commute. Their conversations drifted around Catherine, fragments of million-dollar deals, golf handicaps, and summer homes in the Hamptons. Catherine turned another page, content in her bubble of Regency England. "Excuse me," a deep voice broke her concentration. "I believe you're in my seat." Catherine looked up into the face of a silver-haired man, perhaps in his late 50s. His suit probably cost more than what most people earned in a month, and his watch, a Patek Philippe, glinted under the cabin lights. "I don't think so," Catherine replied softly, reaching into her sweatshirt pocket for her boarding pass. "13A, that's what I have." The man glanced at her boarding pass with barely concealed contempt, then at his own. "My mistake," he said, not sounding apologetic in the slightest. "13B, I'm next to you." As he settled into his seat, Catherine couldn't help but notice the way his eyes darted over her attire, lingering on her sweatshirt with undisguised judgment. He shifted uncomfortably as if afraid her casual clothing might somehow contaminate his bespoke suit. "Walter Kingsley," he introduced himself, extending a manicured hand. "Kingsley Financial? And you're—" "Catherine," she replied with a polite smile, accepting his handshake. No last name offered, no company affiliation. She'd learned long ago that anonymity was a gift. "First time in first class?" Walter asked, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Catherine tilted her head slightly. "No, I fly quite regularly." "Well, it's just that most people dress for the experience," he said, gesturing to her attire. "You know, out of respect." Before Catherine could respond, a younger businessman across the aisle snorted quietly. His eyes met Walter's, and something unspoken passed between them, male camaraderie built on shared disdain. "Some people just get lucky with upgrades," the younger man said, loud enough for Catherine to hear. "I've seen it happen. The airlines are practically giving away first class these days." Catherine simply smiled, turning back to her book. Her mother had taught her the grace of silence in the face of rudeness. Besides, she had Mr. Darcy's latest misadventure to attend to, far more interesting than the limited imaginations of men like Walter Kingsley. The flight was scheduled as a short one, just under 2 hours if the weather held. Catherine had chosen this particular flight because she knew the pilot, Captain Reynolds, was one of their best. Robert trusted him implicitly, and in matters of aviation, Catherine always deferred to her husband's judgment. Today had been a rare opportunity, a chance to fly home alone after visiting her sister in Chicago, a trip that had been long overdue. Robert had stayed in New York, caught in the endless meetings that came with running Atlantic Skyways. "Just take the company plane," he'd suggested, but Catherine had refused. There was something about traveling anonymously that she cherished, a freedom to be herself without the weight of the Mitchell name. As the last passengers boarded, Catherine caught fragments of conversation from the three businessmen seated behind her. "Can you believe what's happening with Atlantic Skyway's stock?" one of them said. "Up 17% this quarter. Robert Mitchell knows what he's doing. When he bought that failing airline, everyone thought he was crazy. The man's a genius. I'd give anything for a meeting with him." Catherine smiled into her book. If only they knew. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Catherine remained immersed in her book as the cabin around her buzzed with activity. Across the aisle, a group of 4 executives had formed an impromptu meeting, discussing quarterly projections and market predictions with the confidence of men accustomed to being right. "What do you do, Catherine?" Walter asked, closing his laptop momentarily. His tone suggested it was a question born more of boredom than genuine interest. "I'm in philanthropy," she answered, marking her page. It wasn't a lie. She did oversee the Mitchell Foundation's charitable activities, but it wasn't the whole truth either. "Ah," Walter replied, his interest visibly waning. "One of those nonprofits, saving the whales, feeding the poor." His dismissive wave encompassed apparently all worthy causes in one gesture. "Something like that," Catherine said with a smile, "though the penguins are my particular favorite." She pointed to her sweatshirt. The man across the aisle, who had introduced himself earlier to Walter as James Peterson of Goldman Sachs, leaned in. "Sounds like a hobby more than a career." "Some of us work for a living," Walter added, the men sharing a knowing chuckle. Catherine merely nodded, returning to her novel. 15 years of marriage to Robert had taught her that certain people only recognized worth when it came with dollar signs and titles. These men wouldn't understand the joy she found in helping Robert manage their foundation's $300 million endowment, directing funds to causes that actually changed lives. As the flight attendants began the first-class meal service, Catherine couldn't help but notice the familiar faces. Most of the crew on this route knew who she was, though they maintained the professional discretion she appreciated. Melissa approached with a warm smile. "Would you care for the salmon or the steak, ma'am?" she asked, no special inflection in her voice to betray Catherine's identity. "The salmon, please," Catherine replied. "And for you, sir?" Melissa turned to Walter. "Steak, medium rare, and I'll have a scotch. Neat. You do have Macallan 18, don't you? I won't accept anything less." His tone had shifted, pompous and demanding. Melissa's smile remained professionally fixed. "Of course, sir." As she moved away, Walter leaned toward James across the aisle. "That's how you handle the staff. They need to know who's in charge." James nodded in agreement. "First class is a statement. If you can't afford the lifestyle, stay in economy where you belong." Catherine took a sip of water, her eyes still on her book. She'd encountered countless Walter Kingsleys over the years, men who measured their worth by how well they could dominate a room, a conversation, a flight attendant. "Excuse me," a woman's voice interrupted. It was the passenger seated behind Walter, a sharply dressed executive in her 50s. "Some of us are trying to work. Could you keep it down?" Walter turned, prepared to deliver a withering response, then stopped short when he saw her. "Diana Winters, from Frost Capital?" "Yes," she replied coolly. "Walter Kingsley. We met at the Henderson merger last year." He extended his hand, all smiles now that he recognized her position. "I remember," Diana said, not sounding particularly impressed. Her eyes drifted to Catherine, taking in the sweatshirt and casual demeanor with obvious puzzlement. "Forgive me, but aren't you—" Catherine gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Diana caught it, her eyes widening slightly before a knowing smile crossed her face. "Never mind," Diana finished, settling back in her seat. Walter glanced between them, suspicion etched on his features. "You two know each other?" "Not exactly," Catherine replied, returning to her book. The meal service continued. Walter made a show of sending his steak back, claiming it was overcooked, while loudly explaining to James how a proper steak should be prepared. Catherine ate quietly, enjoying the salmon and ignoring the increasingly obnoxious conversation beside her. "So, tell me, Catherine," Walter said, cutting into his second steak. "How does someone in philanthropy afford first class, boyfriend, husband, or did you just get lucky with an upgrade?" Before she could answer, the plane shuddered slightly, hitting a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Catherine set her book aside, suddenly gripping the armrests. This was the part of flying she hated, the reminder that they were suspended 35,000 feet above solid ground, at the mercy of physics and weather. Afraid of flying? Walter asked, noticing her white knuckles. A little, she admitted. Shouldn't have splurged on first class then, he remarked. Economy would have been just as turbulent, but cheaper. Behind them, the executive named Diana Winters cleared her throat loudly, clearly overhearing Walter's comment and disapproving. Catherine just breathed deeply, focusing on the techniques her therapist had taught her for managing flight anxiety. The plane settled and Melissa approached. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" she asked Catherine, genuine concern in her eyes. "Just some tea, please. Chamomile if you have it." Right away. Melissa moved efficiently, returning moments later with a steaming cup. "Thank you, Melissa," Catherine said gratefully. Walter's eyebrows rose. "On a first-name basis with the flight attendants? You must fly this route often." Catherine simply nodded, sipping her tea. The conversation around her continued, but her mind drifted to Robert. He would be waiting at JFK, despite her insistence that she could take a cab. The CEO of Atlantic Skyways can't have his wife taking cabs, he'd joked. It's bad for business. The turbulence had passed, leaving behind a smooth journey through clear skies. Catherine had returned to her book, finding solace in the familiar pages. Walter, meanwhile, had struck up a conversation with James and another executive who had joined them from across the aisle, a younger man named Trevor who seemed desperate to impress. The Mitchell acquisition of Atlantic Skyways was genius, Trevor was saying, his voice carrying clearly to Catherine, taking a failing airline and making it the gold standard for luxury travel in just 5 years. "Robert Mitchell is overrated," Walter replied dismissively. "He got lucky with timing and market conditions. Anyone with his inheritance could have done the same." Catherine's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her book. Robert had built Atlantic Skyways from near bankruptcy to industry leader through sheer determination and innovation. His inheritance had been modest, just enough to give him a start. The rest was 18-hour days, brilliant strategy, and a genuine desire to transform air travel. "I don't know," James countered. "I heard he answers customer emails personally. Who does that at his level?" "PR stunt," Walter scoffed. "Probably has some assistant handling it all." Catherine suppressed a smile, thinking of the 2 hours Robert spent each evening responding to customer feedback. It was his favorite part of the day, connecting with the people who chose to fly with them. Trevor lowered his voice, though not enough. "What I wouldn't give to meet his wife, though. Catherine Mitchell. Have you seen her? Former model, manages their foundation. Worth billions now." "Married the golden ticket," Walter chuckled. "Smart woman." "Actually," James corrected, "she had her own money. Fashion design business or something before they met. Sold it for millions." Catherine kept her eyes fixed on her book, though she'd stopped reading. Her small clothing line, started straight out of design school, had been successful enough, but hardly millions. She'd sold it to focus on the foundation, a decision she'd never regretted. "Still," Walter insisted, "you don't get to that level without connections. Merit only gets you so far. The rest is who you know, who your parents know, or who you marry." The conversation shifted as Melissa approached with fresh drinks for the men. Catherine couldn't help but notice how Walter's tone changed, becoming overfamiliar, almost condescending. "Tell me, sweetheart," he said to Melissa, "how long have you been with Atlantic? Ever meet the big boss?" Melissa maintained her professional demeanor. 8 years, sir, and company policy doesn't allow us to discuss." "Come on," Walter pressed. "Mitchell must fly his own airline sometimes. What's he like? Demanding? One of those entitled rich guys?" "I really couldn't say, sir." Melissa's eyes flickered briefly toward Catherine, then away. "I bet his wife's a piece of work, too," Trevor added. "Those trophy wives always are. Probably complains if her champagne isn't the right temperature." Catherine set her book down gently. "Excuse me," she said, rising from her seat. "I need to use the restroom." As she moved past Walter, he made no effort to stand or make way for her, forcing her to squeeze awkwardly past his knees. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked toward the front of the cabin, hear the muffled laughter. As she moved past Walter, he made no effort to stand or make way for her, forcing her to squeeze awkwardly past his knees. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked toward the front of the cabin, hear the muffled laughter. In the small bathroom, Catherine splashed cold water on her face. Normally, their ignorant comments wouldn't bother her. She'd heard far worse over the years. But today, after a week of missing Robert, dealing with her sister's health scare, and the stress of flying, her patience was wearing thin. When she returned to her seat, Walter and his newfound friends were comparing watches. Walter's Patek, James's Rolex, and Trevor's Breitling, each trying to one-up the others. "That's what separates us from them," Walter was saying, gesturing vaguely toward the economy section. "Understanding the value of quality, of status. First class isn't just a wider seat, it's a mindset." His eyes fell on Catherine as she retook her seat. "Don't you agree, Catherine? Though I suppose in your line of work, luxury isn't exactly a priority." His gaze pointedly took in her sweatshirt again. "I believe comfort is more important than status," she replied evenly. "Says someone in a penguin sweatshirt," Trevor snickered. Walter leaned closer, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. "A word of advice. If you want to be taken seriously in first class, dress the part. This isn't the bus." Diana Winters, who had been silently observing from her seat behind them, suddenly spoke up. "Perhaps she doesn't need a costume to validate her worth, gentlemen." Walter turned, his expression cooling. "Just making conversation, Diana." "No," Diana replied. "You're being condescending to someone you know nothing about." Catherine shot Diana a grateful look. The older woman nodded slightly, then returned to her work. Walter seemed ready to respond when the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We're beginning our initial descent into New York. We've been notified of a slight delay at JFK, so we'll be entering a holding pattern for approximately 20 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Catherine's hand instinctively went to her phone. 20 minutes meant Robert would be waiting longer. She sent him a quick text. "Minor delay. Don't wait if you need to get back to the office." His response came seconds later. "Nothing more important than picking up my wife. See you soon, love." The simple message brought a smile to her face, reminding her why none of this mattered. Not Walter's judgments, not the snickers, not the assumptions. In 20 minutes, she'd be with the one person who had never cared what she wore, only who she was. The plane circled lazily above the sprawling metropolis of New York City, caught in the holding pattern that was all too familiar to frequent flyers. Below them, the iconic skyline stretched out like a miniature model, the afternoon sun glinting off glass and steel. "They need to fix these delays," Walter complained, checking his Patek Philippe for the third time in as many minutes. "Time is money, and Mitchell is wasting both." "I'm sure Robert Mitchell isn't personally responsible for JFK's air traffic," Catherine remarked, unable to stop herself. Walter raised an eyebrow. "First-name basis with the CEO? What are you, a stalker fan?" Trevor and James chuckled, clearly enjoying Catherine's discomfort. "I've met him," Catherine said simply, returning to her book. "Right," Walter snorted. "And I've had tea with the Queen." Diana Winters leaned forward again. "Gentlemen, your conversation is not only unprofessional, but embarrassingly uninformed." Walter twisted in his seat, irritation crossing his features. "What's your problem, Diana? Defending the help now?" "The help?" Diana repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "Is that how you view everyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of success?" Before Walter could respond, Melissa approached their row, her professional smile firmly in place, though her eyes betrayed fatigue. "We'll be landing shortly, folks. Mr. Kingsley, there's a message for you from the ground staff." She handed Walter a folded piece of paper. He opened it, scanned the contents, and his expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching reverence. "Robert Mitchell wants to meet me at the terminal," he said, his voice rising with excitement. "Me specifically?" Catherine's eyes widened slightly. Robert hadn't mentioned meeting any passengers. "Yes, sir," Melissa confirmed. "He's requested meetings with several passengers upon arrival." Walter turned to James and Trevor, his earlier arrogance magnified tenfold. "Gentlemen, this is how it happens. The right connections, the right impression. He must have heard my name, known my reputation." "How?" James asked, visibly jealous. "We've just been sitting here." Walter tapped his temple. "It's about being visible, being known. Mitchell clearly recognizes talent when he sees it." Catherine bit her lip to prevent herself from laughing outright. The men's excitement was almost childlike, preening and adjusting their ties at the prospect of meeting her husband. The plane began its final descent, the familiar sensation of pressure building in Catherine's ears. She swallowed hard, gripping the armrests again as her anxiety flared. Flying had never come easily to her, an irony not lost on her given her husband's profession. "Seriously, what is with you?" Walter asked, noticing her white knuckles. "It's just landing." "Some people have fears, Walter," Diana interjected coolly. "Just as some people have manners. Apparently neither can be assumed." Walter shot her an annoyed glance, but said nothing more as the plane touched down with a gentle bump, rolling smoothly along the runway. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport. Local time is 4:15 p.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 72 degrees. On behalf of Captain Reynolds and the entire crew, thank you for flying Atlantic Skyways today." The announcement continued as the plane taxied toward the gate. Catherine felt the familiar relief wash over her. Another safe landing, another fear conquered, at least until the next flight. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, the cabin erupted into activity. Walter and his new friends were particularly eager, gathering their belongings with unusual haste. "Don't want to keep Mitchell waiting," Walter explained, straightening his tie. "First impressions and all that." "Of course," Catherine replied, taking her time. She knew Robert would wait. The plane docked at the gate, and the door opened with a hydraulic hiss. First-class passengers were invited to disembark. Catherine held back, letting Walter and the others rush ahead, their excitement palpable. As she stepped into the jet bridge, Melissa pulled her aside gently. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is waiting in the VIP lounge. He asked me to escort you." "Thank you, Melissa, but I think I'll go the regular way today." Catherine smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I believe a certain group of gentlemen are about to learn an important lesson." Melissa's professional composure cracked slightly, a genuine smile breaking through. "I believe they are, ma'am." Catherine walked slowly through the terminal, deliberately staying within eyesight of Walter and his group. They had gathered near the exit gate, clearly looking for someone important, straightening their suits and checking their appearances. Then she saw him, Robert Mitchell, her husband of 15 years, standing tall in a simple navy suit, no tie, his silver-streaked dark hair slightly tousled. At 45, he still had the same effect on her as the day they met. He was scanning the crowd, looking for her. Their eyes met, and his face lit up with a smile that never failed to warm her heart. As she walked toward him, she noticed Walter and the others watching, clearly wondering who this newcomer was and whether this was the Robert Mitchell they were expecting. Catherine reached Robert, stepping into his warm embrace, feeling the familiar comfort of his arms around her. "Hello, love," he murmured into her hair. "How was your flight?" "Enlightening," she replied, turning slightly so she could see Walter's face. The realization was dawning on him, his expression morphing from confusion to shock as he connected the dots. The woman in the penguin sweatshirt, the casual confidence, the first-name reference to Robert Mitchell. Robert kept his arm around Catherine's waist as he looked over at the gaping executives. "Gentlemen," he said pleasantly, "I understand you've had the pleasure of my wife's company during your flight." Walter Kingsley's face had drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Beside him, Trevor and James stood frozen, their expressions caught between horror and disbelief. "Your wife?" Walter finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Catherine Mitchell," Robert confirmed, his tone pleasant but his eyes hard as steel. "I believe you've been sharing her company for the past 2 hours." Catherine watched the realization ripple through them, the mental calculations, the retracing of every word they'd spoken during the flight, every dismissive glance, every condescending remark. "Mrs. Mitchell," Trevor stammered, we had no idea. Your sweatshirt, I mean—" "My favorite," Catherine interjected calmly. "A gift from my husband." She gently touched the row of embroidered penguins. "Comfort over pretense, every time." Diana Winters approached, extending her hand to Robert. "Diana Winters, Frost Capital. Your wife handled herself with remarkable grace today, Robert. You should be proud." "I always am," Robert replied, shaking her hand warmly. "Good to see you again, Diana. How's Edward?" Recovering well from the surgery, thank you for asking, and for the flowers. Walter seemed to be recalibrating, his business instincts kicking in despite his mortification. He thrust his hand forward. Walter Kingsley, sir. Kingsley Financial. It's an honor to meet you. Your wife and I were just having a fascinating discussion about first-class travel. Robert's eyebrow rose slightly as he regarded Walter's outstretched hand. Were you? Catherine texted me some highlights. He didn't accept the handshake, instead checking his watch. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse us, I've arranged a private car for my wife. Of course, James said quickly, pulling Walter back slightly. Again, Mrs. Mitchell, please accept our apologies for any misunderstandings. Catherine simply nodded, her arm linked through Robert's as they turned to leave. A few steps away, she paused and looked back. Mr. Kingsley, she called softly. Walter's head snapped up, hope flashing briefly across his features, perhaps a chance at redemption. Your watch is beautiful, but it's running 3 minutes fast. She tapped her own wrist, where a simple silver timepiece gleamed. You might want to get that adjusted. Without waiting for a response, she and Robert continued toward the exit, leaving behind 3 stunned executives and 1 quietly amused Diana Winters. You heard everything? Catherine asked as they walked. Enough, Robert replied, his jaw tightening slightly. Melissa sent me texts. I was ready to come on board myself, but she assured me you were handling it with your usual grace. I almost cracked when he said you were overrated, Catherine admitted, squeezing his arm. Robert chuckled. Only almost? Your restraint is one of the many reasons I adore you. He glanced down at her sweatshirt. Though your fashion sense remains questionable. Catherine laughed, the tension of the flight finally dissolving. Says the man who bought me this masterpiece. And you wear it more than anything else in your wardrobe, he teased. They reached the exit where Philip, their driver for over a decade, waited beside a sleek black car. He smiled warmly at Catherine, opening the door for her. Welcome home, Mrs. Mitchell. Good flight? Educational, Philip. Very educational. As they settled into the back seat, Catherine finally felt the weight of the day lift from her shoulders. Robert took her hand, his thumb gently caressing her palm. I was thinking, he said casually, about Walter Kingsley. Catherine groaned. Must we? I'd rather forget him entirely. Kingsley Financial is seeking new investors, Robert continued, a mischievous glint in his eye. They've approached Atlantic's board 3 times in the last month. And I'm thinking his charm and people skills might not be the right fit for our company culture. Catherine considered this, then shook her head. Don't reject him because of me. Judge his proposal on its merits. Robert smiled, leaning over to kiss her forehead. That's why you're the heart of our foundation. Always fair, even to those who don't deserve it. As they drove through the bustling streets of New York, Catherine rested her head on Robert's shoulder, thinking about Walter and men like him, so caught up in appearances, in status symbols and power plays, that they missed the substance beneath the surface. Back at the airport, Melissa helped Diana Winters with her carry-on. Did you enjoy the show? Melissa asked quietly. Diana smiled. Immensely. I've known Catherine for years through charity work. She could buy and sell those buffoons 10 times over, yet she never flaunts it. Mrs. Mitchell is one of a kind, Melissa agreed. She remembers every crew member's name, asks about our families. Unlike some, Diana remarked, glancing meaningfully at Walter, who was still standing shell-shocked by the gate, his former bravado deflated like a punctured balloon. As Walter watched the Mitchell's car disappear into the New York traffic, a text alert pinged on his phone. He opened it to find a message from his assistant. Atlantic Skyways declined our investment proposal. Mitchell himself reviewed and rejected it. Walter closed his eyes, the full impact of his misjudgment washing over him. He had spent 2 hours belittling the wife of a man whose approval he desperately needed, all because of a penguin sweatshirt and his own prejudice. Trevor and James had already slunk away, distancing themselves from the debacle. Walter stood alone, clutching his designer briefcase and wearing his Patek Philippe, status symbols that had meant everything to him this morning, but suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless. In the distance, he spotted Catherine's flight attendant, Melissa, walking through the terminal. She caught his eye for just a moment, gave him a small, knowing smile, and continued on her way. Another reminder that in life, as in first class, it was never about the clothes you wore or the watch you flaunted, but the respect you showed to everyone around you. Remember, true worth isn't found in designer labels or first-class tickets, but in how we treat others, regardless of their apparent status. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful lessons wrapped in compelling narratives. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, never judge a book or a sweatshirt by its cover.